It's 8:45 at night and I'm eating dinner straight out of the pot, standing up, alone, because the person I made it for isn't here anymore. 31 days ago, I ran an experiment on the man I loved. I said yes to every single thing he asked me to do. Tonight, I'm going to show you exactly what that cost me, and it's not what you think. By the end of this, I'll tell you the 4 words my therapist said back to me that changed how I understood the entire thing. But we need to go back 31 days to the night this actually started. 2 months before that first night, my therapist used a phrase I couldn't shake. By the end of this, I'm going to tell you the 4 words she said back to me once it was over, because they reframed the entire 30 days. But it starts on a different night in this same kitchen 31 days earlier. 31 days earlier, I stood at this same stove holding this same wooden spoon over a pot of jambalaya Julian said tasted store-bought. He'd already eaten half a plate of it. He just didn't like how it made him feel, being served something he'd decided wasn't good enough, made by a woman who'd spent 40 minutes on it after a 10-hour shift. So I dumped it, rinsed the pan, and started over because that felt easier than watching his negative attitude for the rest of the night. And I said the 4 words that started this whole experiment. I'll make it again. My therapist had already used that phrase by then. She said Julian showed textbook signs of what psychologist Heinz Kohut back in 1972 named narcissistic injury, a wound to the ego so fragile that even small slights get treated like assassination attempts. I didn't want to believe her, so I decided to test it myself. For 30 days, I would erase every boundary I had left. I would say yes to every demand, every accusation, every little thing, and I would document exactly what happened to him and to me. Now I'm sharing that with you. The first week felt like a miracle. Before the experiment, Julian and I fought over things that shouldn't have been fights. My coat on a Friday night, a text from my brother that lasted too long, but on day 1, when he saw me reaching for my keys and said he couldn't believe I was seriously going out after the day he'd had, I put the keys down. I looked him in the eyes and said he was right. I'd stay. His face did something I hadn't seen in months. It softened. For 7 straight days, I gave him 100% compliance. I agreed with every complaint about his co-workers, even the one about a man named Derek who apparently chewed gum aggressively. I cancelled a dinner for my college roommate because Julian said he needed the apartment quiet to work on his business ideas. In return, I got the man I met at a co-worker's wedding 2 years earlier. He called me his soulmate in front of his friends and told them I was impossibly patient, and they laughed the way people laugh when they don't know what else to do with a compliment that specific. Harvard psychologist Craig Malkin studied this exact pattern for over a decade before naming it in his book, Rethinking Narcissism. He calls it love bombing, and his research found it isn't affection, it's investment. The narcissist front-loads praise the same way a casino fronts you free drinks on your first visit, because the house always collects eventually. I knew technically that I was collecting data on a controlled experiment. My brain didn't care. It wanted the drug anyway. There was a barbecue on day 8 at his sister's place. Julian introduced me by putting his hand flat on my back and telling his cousin, "This is Mary, the only person who's ever actually gotten him." I remember standing there holding a paper plate of potato salad, genuinely proud, like I'd passed some kind of exam nobody else in that yard even knew was being administered. I drove home that night thinking the last 2 years had just been a rough patch. So if compliance felt that good, why didn't it last? Day 12 is when I found out. Julian woke me at midnight because he was stressed about a client email, and since the rule was yes, I sat up for 2 hours rubbing his back while he read the email out loud, changing about 1 word each pass. The next morning, he asked me to write his response for him. When I paused for maybe 2 seconds before agreeing, he sighed and said he guessed his career just wasn't a priority to some people. 2 seconds of hesitation, treated like a small betrayal. Clinical psychologist Ramani Durvasula has spent years studying this exact dynamic, what she calls narcissistic supply, the theory that a narcissist doesn't actually want a partner so much as a renewable resource, and a renewable resource, by definition, never gets to say it's running low. My schedule disappeared somewhere around day 15. My friends stopped texting because I'd stopped answering. By day 16, he'd started keeping a list on his phone titled Things She Used to Forget and read it to me over dinner like a toast. By day 19, he was rating my responses out loud, actual numbers, though never above a 9, because a 10 would have meant he could stop watching me so closely. I was becoming very good at a job nobody was paying me for. The physical toll showed up before I admitted anything was wrong. Brain fog by day 20, a knot under my ribs that didn't loosen even when he was asleep. My heart started pounding whenever his contact photo lit up my phone. I stopped sleeping through the night around day 24 because my mind had learned to wait for the phone to light up, the same way you flinch at a doorbell after an unexpected delivery. So here's the part I actually need you to sit with, because by day 26, it stopped being about Julian and started being about something I had to choose. Julian sat me down and told me his content coaching business needed a real investment. That meant quitting my marketing job to manage it full-time, unpaid, and moving $11,000 out of my retirement account to cover the first 3 months. And underneath the fear, there was a much harder question sitting in my chest. Every dollar in that account was a piece of a future I had built by myself, before him, for myself. And every part of me that loved him wanted to believe that future could include both of us if I just proved it one more time. I wasn't just afraid of losing money, I was afraid that protecting myself meant admitting I loved someone who would let me lose it. So I told him I would think about it, because I didn't know yet which future I was willing to let go of, the one I'd built or the one I still wanted to believe in. If any part of that sounds familiar, stay with me, because it gets harder before it gets honest. And if you want to see what I actually chose, subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. I eventually said yes anyway. My hands were shaking when I opened the banking app. The money transferred 4 days later. He didn't take me to dinner. He didn't say thank you. He glanced at his phone, saw the confirmation and said, "Took you long enough to figure out what actually matters." That was the moment I understood something Durvashula writes about often, that a narcissist doesn't experience your sacrifice as love. He experiences it as confirmation that the supply is stable. The more I gave, the smaller I got in his eyes, until I wasn't a partner being cared for. I was a utility being maintained, like a car you only think about when it won't start. Day 31, I finally made it to the end of my experiment, so I made the jambalaya again. Same pot, same spoon, except this time Julian looked up from his phone mid-bite and said, "Go get me a fork, Mary. This one has a weird smudge on it." I stayed sitting. I said, "No, get it yourself." The room went cold in about 2 seconds. This is what therapists in the narcissistic abuse recovery community, building on Kohut's original framing, call a narcissistic injury moment, the instant a boundary lands not as a request but as an attack on the whole structure holding the ego up. Julian didn't get quiet. He stood up, called me selfish and unstable in the same breath, and by the next day he'd told 3 mutual friends I'd changed and become controlling. He blocked my number that same afternoon. No conversation, no goodbye. I found out afterward that grey rock, the method survivors use to make themselves boring and unreadable to a narcissist, was named by an online support community over a decade ago because becoming a rock, grey and uninteresting, is often the only response that doesn't feed the exact reaction Julian gave me in that living room. Which brings me back to right now. The jambalaya was still on the stove when he left, so I'm eating it standing up, straight from the pot, no bowl, no fork, using the same wooden spoon I used 31 days ago on the night this started. It tastes exactly the same as it did that first time, before he ever told me it didn't. I texted my therapist a single line that night, just to close the loop on an experiment she never actually asked me to run. She wrote back 4 words, and I've kept the screenshot since. The rice was fine. That's the law. A narcissist never actually needed the rice to be perfect. He needed you to believe it wasn't, so you'd keep cooking. Compliance was never the peace offering I thought it was. It was a bill, and it was always going to come due. I still make this jambalaya sometimes, alone, on ordinary Tuesdays that have nothing to do with him. If you want to see what happens the next time I test a law like this one, I'll see you in the next video.